This week, we're looking a little bit at the gap between the narratives that turn up not just in the media, as in the press, but also in conventional wisdom, in social media, and so on. Things, particularly if you're not paying close attention to news stories emerging out of everywhere. Things are not necessarily playing out the way things might have concretized in your minds. And we can start off a little bit with just what's happened right away in India. We had election results come in yesterday. Now, I know we had general elections in India earlier this year, and we talked about them at length on this podcast. But the election wheel always turns in India, and we had two state elections. One of which was a direct face-off between the BJP and the Congress in the North Indian state of Haryana. And the other was the first election since momentous events in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which was downgraded to a union territory. We don't have to get into the details, although we may touch upon some of them in our premium segment, details on which to follow. But the simple, headline results out of these elections from results from yesterday are that the big narrative that the BJP was on a big downswing and Modi had been hit, and the Congress was on an upswing, and things are only going to go in this direction, has been completely dented. The Congress exit polls, everything seemed to suggest the Congress would romp home in Haryana. The BJP would be severely weakened, and instead they have won the state for the first time. Any party has won it 3 times in a row, which gives them, it's quite a long period of dominance in this North Indian state. It's small. Haryana is not very big and not really relevant at the huge national stature. But given that all trends seem to be going one way, this flips the script a little bit. And then in Jammu and Kashmir, which is much more complicated, and there's a whole other background that we won't be able to get into on this episode. The BJP, which had been hoping to completely turn things around after 2019 when they took away autonomy from the state, has and even did a bunch of what we call delimitation, which in America would be called gerrymandering, which is attempting to move borders around to give themselves something better. Ultimately, the BJP did worse or about the same as it has done before. And a regional party allied with the Congress, the National Conference, has come out on top, suggesting that both people are still quite angry with the BJP in that state. But also all these efforts at manipulation have only gone so far. So those are, really upending a little bit many assumptions that people may have made about Indian politics after the election results earlier this year.
We spent the first few months of this podcast before the Indian general election happened, sort of worrying that maybe the election was a bit too boring because it was all a foregone conclusion. We all knew that the BJP was going to win big, and it almost meant that we had to find other things to talk about in the run-up to it. And then, of course, the election itself was confounding and completely changed the narrative. That seems to have happened again. That had that narrative begun to shift in the media or in the sort of public mind before these election results, or was it just as much of a surprise as the general election result was?
On one side, it was a surprise. Again, opinion polls, exit polls seem to be giving the state to the Congress, and there was a general expectation that they would win. That said, there was a fair bit of factionalism. Now, the Congress has always been a more factional party. Again, this may be a term that's not as familiar. We use it as shorthand for internal or sort of infighting in Indian politics.
We have that too.
And the Congress, in some ways, political scientists have suggested benefits from this kind of infighting because it suggests to voters that it's a bigger tent and can keep multiple groups in. In this case, it chose to clearly side with one of those factions, thinking having a more assertive approach and assuming that the tailwinds were behind it. But that seems to have, come a crop up. So there were signs of that unhappiness from one side of the factions in the run up. But it also is a bit of the tail wagging the dog. I think that assumption that the Congress was going to be on an automatic upswing after the elections earlier this year, and the BJP was going down, led them to all sorts of calculations about, okay, let's not let both factions be in the fray. Let's take a particular line, and now it seems to have undone them. And And forgive me, listeners, we have more elections coming up in just a couple of months, particularly in the much bigger state of Maharashtra, where Mumbai is the capital, and those are much more complicated. But yeah, everyone assumed the BJP would severely be hit in those elections, and now having won this state, there's a bit of momentum back in Modi's sails.
As we just saw, momentum's a tricky thing because momentum can mean great, the wins at my sails. I can now, like, I'm a winning team. People want to be on a winning team. They're going to back me. It can also mean that the party starts making mistakes they don't mean to make. It can also mean that people assume, oh, I don't need to go out and vote. I mean, this is probably less true in the Indian context, but in the US context, oh, I don't need to vote. I can stay home. Or, oh, I can do a protest vote. Or, oh, I'm going to switch my vote. They're getting too cocky. So it's sort of, I mean, obviously, if you're a political party, you'd rather be up than down, but it's not guaranteed, I don't think, in any Indian state or anywhere in the world, really, that momentum is necessarily going to help you.